starting with Proverbs and then on to the Gospel of John. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. He asked her, Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, he said, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Our identity is important to us. Who we are, our name, is very important to us. Some scholars have even called us the identification generation, where we are consumed with our ID, where we are consumed with who we are, and we are focused on ourselves. It is important to find out who you are and live according to yourself, some people say, and that is true. We don't want other people to get credit necessarily for what we have done. We don't want anyone to steal our identity. I heard just this past week that $6 billion will be stolen during tax time, people trying to pay their taxes to the IRS. $6 billion. Identity theft is a growing industry among us. And it's not just about our money being stolen or our credit being stolen. It's about our name being stolen. Someone said, all you really have is your name. And if that is ruined, you are in trouble. For Christians, we know that our identity is not simply all wrapped up in ourselves. We find our identity beyond ourselves in Jesus Christ. Our name is not just ours, it is given to us by God, and we are His. We are not just ourselves. And this is really important because God calls us by name to do something with our lives, to do something beyond ourselves and our selfishness. There's so much focus on ourselves in our culture today. It is important to know that God calls us by name beyond ourselves and calls us to go beyond our own tendencies and comforts. Yet many, out of fear of scams and fear of lies and fear out of people abusing their names, wrap their identity all around themselves and won't let anybody come near. So Shakespeare has Polonius say in the play Hamlet, "To thine own self be true." And for many people, that is their mantra. That is what they believe. That is what they hold on to. To thine own self be true. And there's some good in that. Because if you're true to yourself, that means you're sincere. That means you have a little bit of integrity. That means you do what you really think you're going to do. But there's some bad in that, too, to your own self be true. And the bad in it is, if your focus is only on being true to yourself, you forget what's true outside of yourself. And sometimes that means you don't listen to others' advice. And you can't hear even God speaking to you, calling to get beyond your comfort zone, to do something extraordinary for Him, something beyond and unusual for Him. Someone who is true only to themselves can tend to be navel-gazing or mirror-watching or narcissistic or even lazy because you just want to do what yourself wants to do. And God calls us beyond that. He calls us to not be blind to the things outside of ourselves or to our own faults. I don't doubt there are a lot of the politicians that we hear today who are always pointing at the other politicians, calling them bad names and liars and things, think that they are true to themselves and sincere. It's easy to deceive yourself. And this is the problem with just trying to be true to yourself and letting that alone be your guide in life. We as Christians are called to be true to Jesus Christ beyond ourselves. We are called to find our identity in His name, to find ourselves in Him, and even to lose ourselves in Him, to take up our cross, to deny ourselves, and follow Him. Christians are not simply to try to find the truth within, but try to find the truth in God. We are to remember who we are, but also remember whose we are. We are the Lord's, and we seek to follow Him and glorify His name. He is the maker of us. He is the lover of our soul, and we should seek to listen to Him and to listen to our name called by Him. Mary Magdalene was sad. Jesus had died, and her world had come crashing down upon her. Jesus had healed her of 7 demons, of mental illness, of physical illness, so many different illnesses. She had been healed and set free. The Romans and the leaders of the Jews had all worked together to crucify Him, to kill Him, and were complicit in His death. And the most righteous one she ever knew, the most loving one she ever knew, was killed before her eyes. And then when she went to the tomb, the body was gone, and she was devastated. She heard angel voices saying, "He is not here, He is risen," but it didn't register in her. She even heard the voice of Jesus Himself saying, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" But she had her back turned, and she had all these tears running down her face. She couldn't see. She couldn't hear. She was all caught up in her sadness. Have you ever been like that before? You're all so caught up in your sadness and your grief and your devastation of something that's happened to you in life that it's even hard to see Jesus standing right in front of you. That's how Mary was. But you know what changed Mary? Jesus called her name. He said, "Mary." And at once she recognized Him, the Bible says. She fell at His feet. She grabbed Him. She didn't even want to let Him go because He called her by name. And she knew that voice. It's interesting to see how many times the risen Christ calls people by name in the Bible. He does it a lot. And so He called Mary by name here. He called Simon Peter by name. You remember Peter, before the crucifixion, had denied Jesus 3 times. He said, "I don't know Him, I don't know Him, I don't know Him." So Jesus went to Peter, who had gone back to fishing on the lake. Jesus went to Peter and he said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said that 3 times. He called his name. "Simon, son of John, do you love me? Do you love me, Simon, son of John?" He called him by name until Peter repented and recanted, and he agreed to feed his sheep. He also called Saul by name. You remember Saul was persecuting Christians up and down the coast of Israel and Syria. And he had a vision on the road to Damascus, a vision of Jesus calling to him by name, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And it changed Saul's life to the point that he changed his name to Paul and became one of the greatest apostles in the world. And Peter became one of the greatest leaders of the church. And Mary became a great faithful disciple of Jesus Christ. But Jesus came to all 3 of them in their darkest moments and called their name. Jesus comes to us in our darkest times. When we feel like there's no hope, we feel we have nowhere else to turn, we have no strength in and of ourselves, and he calls our name. And we know of his love and of his grace. When the risen Christ calls your name, it is to remind you that the darkest despair of life, that even death cannot stop him, that there is always hope in Jesus Christ. Find your identity in his name. Let your name be wrapped and intertwined with his name. The good news is Jesus is still alive, and he still calls people by name. He says so much in our passage in John 10. He says, he calls his sheep by name and leads them. His sheep follow him, for they know his voice. You know, every year in America, there is a young shepherds contest, and it's for young keepers of sheep between the ages of 18 and 25 years old. And to be a part of this contest, you have to send in a YouTube video of yourself keeping the sheep. And specifically, you have to be able to call the sheep, and the sheep come to you. That's the number one requirement for being a shepherd, is to call the sheep, and the sheep respond by coming to you. This is what Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, does for us. He calls us. He knows us by name, and he calls us. And our response should be not to wander off, not to run the other way, not to hold our ears, but to follow his voice and to listen to him and to ask, Lord, where do you want me to go? Do you doubt that Jesus knows your name, really? I was telling this at the sunrise service last week, about a week and a half ago, I was trying to pay some of my taxes online, so I had to open up this account with the IRS. And to do that, it had to make sure I was John Benson Sloan. So it asked me all these questions, when I was born, where I was born. And I thought, how do you know all this? And it even asked me, what credit card did you open in 1980? I thought, I opened a credit card in 1980? I couldn't even remember that. The IRS knows more about me than I know about myself. If the IRS knows that, and if Google knows that, Google your name. You're there. If they know that, cannot the creator of the world, who creates all wisdom, who made you, know who you are? God knows you. He knows you by name. We say this when we baptize people. He knows you by name, and he calls you to do something more with your life than live for yourself. He calls you to love him. calls you to love your neighbor. There are lots of people who think that they don't matter. They think that nobody in this world cares for them, and nobody knows whether they live or die, and nobody cares if they live or die. There are lots of people like that. Teenagers who think that. Older folks who think that. Everybody in between. But let me tell you, the one who made you knows you, and he cares for you. He says this so many times in the Bible. One of the great passages that I love that talks about this is from Isaiah 49. It says, "Can a mother forget her nursing child? Can she feel no love for a child she has born? Even if that were possible, I would not forget you. See, I have engraved your name on the palm of my hands." God knows you by name. Remember the story of Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus was a small guy. People didn't like Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector. I guess he worked for the IRS of his day. They were even rougher back then. And nobody liked Zacchaeus because he took more than his share. He was known as a thief. And he was a short guy. And so he climbed a tree to see Jesus. There was this parade Jesus was having, an impromptu parade down the streets of Jericho. And the parade stopped when Jesus stopped right in the tree where that little tiny hated guy was. And Jesus looked up at the tree to this guy he had never met before, and he called Zacchaeus by name. And he said, "Zacchaeus, you come down because I'm going to your house today. I'm going to eat with you and drink with you." And Zacchaeus said, "Oh, Lord, I'm not worthy." He said, "I know you're not worthy. It's okay. If you feel like you're not worthy of having the risen Christ call your name, it's okay. You're not. Nobody is. Not me, not anybody else. But if Christ calls your name, then leave the rest behind. Leave what's pulling you away from him and seek to follow him and to respond to his voice. He has engraved your name on the palm of his hands. You know how he did that? On the cross. On the cross, he engraved your name on the palm of your hands. You know, when the risen Christ rose from the dead, a lot of things were healed about him, but one thing that wasn't healed were the holes in his hands. So he could say to Thomas, "Put your hand in my holes. Put your hand where I've engraved your name." The risen Christ is still alive, and he calls you by name to do something for him. I can't tell you what that is. Listen and let him tell you what that is. Listen to the voice of the Lord and respond to him with all your strength, heart, soul, and mind. Amen.